this matter of crime and punishment anyway? Through the centuries, our laws have been modified. Till now, men look back with horror at the hangings and killings of the past. It's been proven that as the penalties are less barbarous, crimes are less frequent. I need to argue with Your Honor that cruelty only breeds cruelty.
I feel like if I had heard that closing argument speech when I did my persuasive presentation in middle school about capital punishment, that I would have fared a lot better with my grade.
Oh yeah, you would have crushed, and no one remembers this speech probably, right? Because it's
right?
Famous.
Yeah,
but it is. Yeah, it's a very compelling argument against the death penalty. I realized you chose two films that are sort of anti-death penalty films, anti-capital punishments. Look at you being political. I love it. Not surprising, though. Not surprising at all.
No,
we are talking. What are we talking about? We're talking about In Cold Blood, 1967. In Compulsion, 1959, two films I have not seen before.
What? I thought for sure you had seen In Cold Blood.
No.
Oof.
I was dreading it, actually.
Really?
I was like, oh, like another Capote. It's like, I don't know. There's that whole
seen Capote,
thing.
Right?
Yeah, I've seen Capote, but I've actually only read excerpts of the book.
Oh, you've read the whole book either?
No,
okay.
The whole thing. Yeah. So
well, hold on.
Pretty
this is film.
This.
Do the intro.
Oh, Film Trace. Yeah, that's what we're doing here, folks. Hey, Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production all the way to release and reception. This is the final episode in our Stranger Than Fiction cycle. We're doing films pre-1970, In Cold Blood and Compulsion. Two, I guess, true crime stories. Did you do any other true crime stuff so far this one? I guess Bling Ring, but that's not about murder. Usually true crime implies murder.
Right. Heavenly Creatures would be the closest.
Yeah, that's the other one. Yeah.
Analogy or analogous choice. And actually, I got vibes from both of these movies with regard to Heavenly Creatures. It's just that film was a lot more overtly homosexual than these two. Was much more subtextual.
Compulsion, yeah, especially you could tell. Like, I'm not super familiar with the whole code system, but I feel like you couldn't do anything that showed homosexuality on the screen in 1959, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
That? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The Hays Code famously did not allow for any kind of like on-screen violence or sexual innuendo, whether homosexual or heterosexual. 1968 was when it finally ended. So like In Cold Blood was still technically within the confines, which is insane because that film
doesn't seem like it is when you look back, and even now watching it, you're like, wow, this pushed a lot of envelopes.
And it was a first for a lot of widely released movies. I've got a list here somewhere in my notes. First appearance in a studio financed movie for the terms pussy, bullshit, jacking off, and diarrhea.
Yeah, I noticed when he said pussy, I was like, wait a second. Like,
right.
You couldn't say that back then. Like, there's no way.
Yeah, really interesting historically, and also I think kind of shows kind of a trend in this collection of episodes, and looking at the idea of adapting strange stories from real life into fictionalized or dramatized films, which is that there is kind of throughout all of the films we've covered a lot of pushing the envelope, not so much as like in your face perhaps as In Cold Blood was in 67, but I think it almost like we've talked in the past about being desensitized to violence, but I think we've also become desensitized to just like storytelling kind of scandals in general. Like going all the way to what initiated this cycle, Cocaine Bear. Can you imagine like even 10, 15 years ago that there would be like a wide release movie? Like I find it so strange that like I have high schoolers talking about like going, like my 10-year-old knows what Cocaine Bear is.
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot of things that go into that, but I think the prevalence of drugs, like drug use and stuff, is so different than it was like 20, 30 years ago. Like cocaine is like, you couldn't say, especially something like a hard drug like cocaine. There's no such thing as like salaciousness or like pushing the envelope. There's no envelope to push at post internet. It's already been pushed, right? Like there's just, film used to be the place where it was unique and a window into the world, but that all got replaced by the internet.
Yeah.
So it's like all these little kids, I forget what movie, it was Cocaine Bear, where some letterboxed reviewer was like this is great for people who grew up watching like live leak execution videos or something like that. I was like, that's pretty apt, right? Like it seems like a movie made for 4chan forum users.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like just over the top and whatever. But it's what I was really thrown by in doing this cycle is that the first two movies we watched are like, for some reason felt the tamest to me. Like we called it Cocaine Bear being like over the top, but it didn't really feel like it was saying anything.
No,
like you watch In Cold Blood, which I think is honestly a way better film than Compulsion. Anyways,
right,
totally right. We can agree on that. And so much more going on here. So much more going on. It's like mind blowing that it's the same medium, which I also thought was crazy too. The difference between Compulsion and In Cold Blood, they're less than 10 years apart, but it feels like a different medium as well.
Absolutely.
Like this film, like what is, the opening of Compulsion specifically? You're like, this looks like zany. Like,
yeah. Is this a Leave It to Beaver episode? Yeah.
Let's dive into In Cold Blood. What do we?
Yes.
Seen it before. You kind of have a good history with it.
Yeah, so I mean, I read as much Capote as I could in college. I think, and like Capote came out right when, like, towards the end of our college tenures, right, undergrad.
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
with Philip Seymour Hoffman. And so I don't know if that was the impetus or just like being an English major in general. But yeah, I like tore through it a couple times along with Breakfast at Tiffany's and other Capote works. But I remember I have like a real strong memory of watching In Cold Blood because it felt so different from all the other times that I've read a book and then watched the movie of that book, because and diving into the research finally, umpteen years later, kinds of sheds a light on it. It just seems it's so simple, and yet it seems so like it still is something that is rarely followed in the book to film adaptation world, which is that the reason that the film is as good as, maybe at least close to as good as the not quote nonfiction novel, as Capote called it, is that essentially you had a singular voice for the book, and you had a singular voice for the film, and they both worked together, but also let each other do their own thing.
Yeah.
Like they had a mutual respect for each other, the director, Richard Brooks, and the book writer, Truman Capote, but Brooks did the adapted screenplay, and he was the guy behind the camera. And there's a great interview with Brooks in which he kind of lays it down on how they work together. He said that Capote asked him, "When am I going to see the script?" And Brooks responded, "Truman, if you want me to do it, I can't show you the script. I'm not going to do it. I intend to follow the intention of the story. It can't be exactly the same, though. The story, the way you wrote it, goes back and forth in time, and I can't do that with the movie. People will become confused. But let's talk about anything you have on your mind." And they did. They met like 15, 20 times, and they had like extended discussions about what the film should look like. And they were two very like kind of strong-willed auteurs in their own mediums, and like that's how you do it. Like, but nobody does that anymore. Like nobody even people rarely did it back then.
Gone Girl, can we count Gone Girl? Sorry,
yeah, I'm sure Fincher and Flynn sat down 15 to 20 times
over some sweet tea and really went for it. This is like it. As someone who's just seen this for the first time, I kind of was dreading it because I just remember the movie Capote coming out. I was like, this is not. It's like, I don't know. so celebrated amongst a certain sect of people that I grew up with, you're included, these liberal arts majors. We all studied English. We all worship Truman Capote. It's a whole thing. And going back and seeing this movie is like, oh God, do I have to really have to do this? But I will say that Richard Brooks clearly had his own vision here. I mean, director, writer, and producer. Did it on sort of a cheaper budget than I think what they were trying to get for it. What's also really strange about this movie, and I totally unaware of this, but it was essentially shopped before the book was completed. Yeah. Which I thought was really fascinating, because we think of that now as like, oh, that's like such a weird kind of incestuous capitalistic way of doing things. But like, yeah, it's been going on for a very, very long time. Hell, they were casting this movie before it was even in like New York Times top 10. Right. So it's like one of those weird sort of it was meant to be a movie as it was being released as a book, which you would not think about. That's not the first thought that came into my head when I was thinking about this movie. That would be like one of those straight to movie like bestseller type situations.
Right.
But what a beautiful work of art, this movie. Right. I can't say that I loved it across the board. But I mean, wow. Like Conrad Hall, cinematography, Peter Zinner, editor, Quincy Jones does the soundtrack. It's just like, and then the acting too. I mean, we got to step on this landmine. Robert Blake, who, had, let's say, a not so great kind of end to his life, and, murdering his wife and all of that.
He was acquitted.
He was acquitted, but then later admitted to it and then lost in civil court. Yeah. He's phenomenal. And he was a journeyman actor even before this. He was young, but he was a child actor and stuff like that. But just phenomenal. Scott Wilson, who Walking Dead fans, Herschel the farmer, his baby, I think one of his first roles. It's a really, to your point, this is a really strong individual, unique work of art. Right. It's interesting. There's the way that it does. I mean, if you go like dive into the research on it, like this whole notion that he was talking to Capote, right? But like also retracing the steps of the killers himself. Yeah. And it's just some weird stuff. There was a press conference. I'm trying to find where this was. Then they had like a press conference where they announced one of the casting at like the penitentiary where the guys were hanged. Right. Robert Blake. Yeah. This is LA Times 1966, November. They revealed the casting of Robert Blake at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, where Smith and Hickok were hanged. So, some weird stuff. Weird stuff's going on. Like, it's funny that we're starting, thinking about Stranger Than Fiction, and a big theme throughout the entire cycle was exploitation. Like, how can you make a movie about a true story, especially murder, without exploiting either the victims or the perpetrators or everybody in between? And here we are with like one of the first big examples of it, and it starts out on a pretty poor footing. With this
and I mean, that I think that's obviously something that Capote struggled with himself, because he was very much drawn to this kind of proto criminal forensics type exploration and psychology, and yet it kind of ruined him emotionally going through it, because he was so fascinated by it and clearly was like a forerunner in this new genre of creative nonfiction, and yet like was well self-aware of the kind of potential harm that was being mustered up by creating this new genre, right? I mean, I think about like, when Serial, the podcast, blew up, and there was so many conversations about like exploitation and true crime stories. And, it's been prevalent in American society in particular for so long. Like if Capote was alive today and like seeing what that world had become that he basically single-handedly started, it's kind of sickening to think about. And yet here we are still like just endlessly and kind of hopelessly drawn to it ourselves, and still self-aware and kind of struggling with it at the same time. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
it's
the stunt press release and kind of
there's crazy stuff. He wouldn't let them. He wouldn't let the actors refer to the novel. Then he would show them crime scene photos. This is Brooks showing this to Blake and Wilson, and you're just like, man, it's
they filmed in the actual Clutter family home where the murders occurred.
God. I mean, that's, I don't have a lot of morals, but like, that's it's like one of those things where it's like, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. Like any average adult knows that's not the right. It's like disrespectful to the victims and all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of mind blowing that he did it. I mean, we all win. Because it's an amazing movie, but like, it's so intertwined here. And you wouldn't expect that from a movie shot in the 66, 67. It feels so, it feels of its time in the fact that when we think about the late 60s, we think about upheaval and social change and stuff like that. And it's certainly a good representation of that change that was going on back then. But on the other hand, it feels very contemporary and modern, right? In a way that is uncomfortable, I think. Because you watch this movie and you're like, God, this kind of feels like a movie that would be on Netflix, or something. There's something about it that is magnetic. And I think for maybe not the right reasons, like talking about true crime and why people are so interested in it. I do think, like, taking a step back, why do we think, I'm assuming that you really like this movie and like you've sort of have a strong opinion of it. I do wonder what about it specifically speaks to people right now.
Yeah. And that was a question that I was wrestling with both during my rewatch of this movie and watching Compulsion for the first time. Because, largely because we've been having these kinds of discussions throughout the cycle of episodes, but especially with Dog Day Afternoon, which is just like, it was, me and our guest Riley were just like, you could not say that it's a stone cold classic, that like every shot is, tight and unique and mesmerizing. And yet you're still grappling with the fact that we're like glorifying this guy who was a monster. Yeah. And that's, and I think at the very least, like, I don't know if I would necessarily say like, oh man, I love In Cold Blood. Like I was interested in rewatching this for the purpose of the show, but if we weren't doing an episode on it, like, even though I have like really strong visceral memories of my first watch of it, I don't know if I would have ever rewatched it.
Well, it's not really an enjoyable watch.
No, that's why I don't think I would say I like it or love it. I admire it, right? Like, it's one of those films that just like is so draining and exhausting.
So exhausting.
That I don't know, but you pause it at any given moment, and like you said, the lighting and cinematography is all magic. Beautiful. So it's like, you take that away from it all.
And there's also just like really lovely, strange shots that I mean, there's even like throwaway stuff. Like there's a shot of a train going through the town to like announce morning, and then like they throw mail off of it. I was like, why would you show that? But for some reason, it works incredibly well. Yeah. Or like in the Mexican sequence where he's sort of like hallucinating, and Wilson's in the bed with the girl, and then there's like this like little flutter of like, I guess you'd call it like Tejano music or mariachi music going on. It's just like this really, it is true craftsmanship in terms of like filmmaking. Yes. Like, it is not a film that is shoddy or B in any way whatsoever. Everything's very intentional here.
And we have to remember that 1967 is one of those, is like the Hollywood year for like stealing from the French New Wave, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah.
Bonnie and Clyde and all that. Like, it's very much also based on a true story and exploitative as hell. Like taking from European trends and really like without even trying to like make it palatable for American audiences.
No, it's not
like
palatable.
I can't imagine being like your average moviegoer in 67 and saying like two for In Cold Blood. I want to watch this true
and these
story.
are major studios. This is Columbia Pictures.
Yeah.
This is not like some micro indie. This is
And
not A24. You know
right.
what I mean?
And they like wanted like Paul Newman or, you know,
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen, like big names to play the murderers. And obviously like Brooks knows that like that's not the way to go. You're going to ruin the authenticity of the picture if you do that. And so he like digs and finds this former child actor and this new guy, Scott Wilson. And I think that's part of the craftsmanship as well, is like you have a film that not only is like looks beautiful, but is like gut-wrenchingly heartbreaking. And then it's got these actors, like it almost feels like kind of like, I don't know, did Richard Brooks know that Robert Blake was going to be a murderer or something? Like he's just so perfect.
Yeah, he's very perfect. Yeah.
And it feels so awful to say that, knowing what happens 35 years later. But
yeah, I mean, it's like we dealt with this, like you mentioned with Dog Day, where it's like separating. In that case, it's like separating the true terrible person versus this amazing performance by Al Pacino on the screen. Here, it's like knowing that Robert Blake is a phenomenal actor, especially in this movie. We have hindsight knowing that he becomes a pretty terrible human being. Yeah. You know, it's like, it's tough. It's like the Roman Polanski stuff. It's like, how do you reconcile? And there's no clear path. There just isn't.
But in terms of like what the film is saying too, is like, it's even more, I don't know, magnanimous than Dog Day, where like you could take the interpretation or messages of that film in several different ways because it's so naturalist. But here it feels very like, it's so stylized. It's so like they draw out the hangings of these two men after they've been sentenced to death, to the point it like reminded me, did you ever see like Dancer in the Dark with Bjork? Right. Yeah. Like they just like want you to like feel so crushed, and then but also be constantly thinking about like, why do I feel so crushed when these guys did these awful things? And yet like I also am like the other thing that stood out to me, after seeing so many movies that like try to psychologize or pathologize murderers, I don't know how they still like make it work to like make you empathize with Perry's like daddy issues. Like it's so interesting to me that still works so many years later after that has been done to death.
You know, I was thinking of this after watching it because and diving into it and like looking at kind of the anti-capital punishment argument that's happening here, and then trying to dive into this whole genre, which you're right is like essentially making someone who does something that universally we would say is pretty monstrous, making them into a dynamic character as opposed to like an old school villain. I mean, that's like the difference, we see in 1950s movies versus 1960s. It's like where the murderer, you can do that. You can give him a backstory. You can give him maybe a reason she or he thinks that they're doing this and why they're doing it. The issue that always pops up to me with true crime, and this is true to this day for me, is I always find it a little bizarre that the focus is so on these people who committed murder, like in this case, and killed 4 people. But the emphasis on the victim and the fallout of the crime is so minuscule. Mm-hmm. It's such a bizarre response to like what happens in these instances. And like the thing that I struggle with true crime in general, I'm not a huge fan of it. I like some of it. Is that like when we say, oh, we're trying to humanize these people who did this monstrous thing. Well, number one, they're already human. You don't need to humanize them, right? And two, I think that there's this sense that like this is somehow an exception to how human beings are. Right. And this is always like, this is me being very cynical. And I'm going to be honest with you. There are 40 murders a day in the United States alone. Like 40 people are murdered every single day by another human being. And so it's like and this movie is like maybe a little bit different than the traditional true crime, but it is kind of the foundation of that perspective where you're trying to sort of like, oh, this is like, number one, they're humans. So you don't have to humanize them. There's no reason to do that. Yes, you're kind of like, you can underplay that they're not like pure evil or a villain, but like, okay, fine. And then it's sort of like, how unique is this sort of stuff? Now, in this case, they killed the family. That happens all the time, right? It literally just happened 2 days ago in a parking lot in Texas, right? Like that's the one thing where I struggle with, where it's like, there's this huge artistic drive to do something here, but I don't know what they're doing, you know? Like, what are they really doing at the end of the day, do you think? Or like, what, I mean, that's kind of like a loaded question, but like, what's maybe the goal of Richard Brooks or Capote?
Yeah, well, I mean, contextualized within, just to keep things relatively simple, like the movies that we've covered from the 60s to today is, I think, first the notion that pre-1970, there was definitely, it was still novel, I think, to, quote, humanize the villain. Yeah. I think that, like, I mean, I think especially like the 60s was a unique decade in that there was a lot of civil unrest and like changing of paradigms and perspectives, at least here in America, that allowed for that kind of dialogue to be fruitful. Why it still works today, though, is definitely a tougher question, but I don't think it's unanswerable. I think it comes back to perhaps anybody that has any kind of interest in storytelling of like morally gray protagonists, whether it's like a straight up anti-hero like Walter White, or of a more like nebulous one like I don't know, would be another like good modern
Dahmer?
Example. Oh God.
Well, that's what keeps popping into my head, is like a show like Dahmer.
Right.
Which is just, was a cultural event.
Yeah.
Last year, was it last year? I don't remember.
And like the definition of modern exploitation, right?
Yeah. Victims' families are still alive and all this sort of stuff. It's, it's a sticky wicket, as they say. It's tough. It's a great piece of art, but then like, I don't know what to do with it. You know what I mean? That's like one of the reasons why, and you brought this up, I can respect it from like the craftsmanship 100%, like across the board, the editing, the cinematography, music, acting. It's a beautiful picture. But I don't ever want to watch it again.
Sure.
Right. And maybe that's a subject matter or whatever, but there's a lot of movies about killing and people doing bad things that I watch The Godfather like once a year. Like what?
Right.
I don't know if it's missing something, or it's.
So what is so take that, like Michael Corleone? What makes that story feel like it has more to say than the story of Perry Smith and Dick Hickok?
Because this one ends, and there's a great. Oh, this is perfect timing for this quote. Brooks said, Brooks held personal beliefs against the death penalty on crimes and commented, "I think the crime without motive is really what this is about. The crime itself was senseless. The boys' lives before that were senseless. And the end is senseless because it solves nothing." And we have that whole speech at the end by, I think it's like the reporter or like a police officer, where he's basically like, this is going to change nothing.
Yeah, the kind of jarringly sudden voiceover from the Capote stand-in.
I think that's why. I think that's why it feels, and he may be right. Brooks may be 100% right that like this doesn't solve anything or whatever. But it kind of undermines the whole point of the film existing. You know what I mean? It's this incredibly cynical thought process.
Well, I mean, from a less cynical, more optimistic standpoint, one could also argue that, we had all this senselessness happen in real time, affecting real people. And so it is like the one vestige of hope that we can get out of it is turning it into art to get people thinking
Who are
differently.
You, Schopenhauer? I feel like you're Arthur Schopenhauer right now. That's one of his lines.
In the flesh.
The only escape was art. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. It's just, but I think that's one of the reasons why it's not like an enjoyable film.
No. And
because,
I mean, we're so deep in this bullshit. I mean, I think we both agree that like art doesn't have to be enjoyable, right?
No, of course not. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be enjoyable to be valuable. Yeah. But I do think that like that's one reason. I don't know why. A movie like this. I mean, it's certainly remembered. I think fairly well. It's in Criterion. That's worth something. But it's one, it's maybe the reason why it's not like a Godfather type movie or like I don't even know. What else would you say was like a big movie in the late 60s? Like the Graduate?
Yeah. Or like Bonnie and Clyde.
Graduate more beloved than a film like this when we know that the craft behind it is probably better. You know what I mean? Loaded question. Love loaded question.
Oh my gosh. So before I kind of fall on my sword too much, I think at this point it's good to note, as has been my trend with these episodes, that even though I love this film and even though I think it's culturally important, it's got its problematic elements apart from everything else we've just mentioned. There is this kind of there was this big kind of discovery of documents and diary entries of the farmer, the Clutter patriarch, that came out in the 90s, and one of which was like reopened a whole like case against the Kansas field office of the FBI because it turned out that the farmer guy was having an affair and that there was some kind of like potential open opportunity for like a revenge plot that like was never discovered between Smith and Hickok and the Clutter family. So like that's the other part of this whole genre, right? Is like even with a film like this, by the master Capote himself, staying as close as possible to the true story. Like Capote literally visited Smith in prison, right? Not unlike, Tom Hardy visiting Bronson in prison in advance of that film. You have like so many open endings, like loose ends from the real life story that could like completely flip the script on everything that happened. Maybe there was a motive. Maybe this isn't as senseless. Maybe it was about money and it just was never recovered. Because that was like that's a sticking point in the story, right? Is that they did this even though they could only find the $43.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing you can never expect.
No.
It's like art can't, in this art can't illuminate fact. It just doesn't. No, and it can't. Especially
it's a new narrative. Yeah,
exactly.
And the other bit I'll mention is I just called him the Master Capote, but he's also historically racist. And one of the things that he did not like about what Brooks did with the film, even though he, lauded a great amount of it, was his inclusion of Quincy Jones on the soundtrack. Capote was quoted saying that he couldn't understand why Jones was doing a film with no black people in it. Like as if he could only score films that featured black leads. And like, I know. And, but like, I don't know. He was friends with Harper Lee and, it's the whole like, I mean, that's also the time of MLK and talking about the problem with moderate liberals and all that. So rough stuff. But doesn't change the fact that like, God, I mean, I remember how much this movie affected me when I saw it when I was like 20 or whatever. And now I'm nearly 40 and it hit me like a ton of bricks all over again.
Yeah, there's something about it. It's just the combination of people involved and the story that they're telling and honestly, it's like a lot of hard work for this movie. It's one of those movies like when I say everything is intentional, like I really do mean that. It's like the cues, everything, the shots, just really beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
On the contrary, would be our next movie, Compulsion.
Right.
Which 1959. What's the back? You picked this one. Give us maybe a little bit of backstory on why you picked it and why you thought it was something to play off of in Cold Blood.
Yeah. So the big draw for me is that I hadn't realized that there was a movie adaptation of Loeb and Leopold, the famous kind of trial of the century. Or at least it was called that, alongside with like the Lindbergh baby kidnapping in the 1920s. And Loeb and Leopold is also heavily referenced, as is the famous attorney that defended those two young murderers, Clarence Darrow, in a novel that I used to teach, which is actually my personal favorite novel of all time, Native Son by Richard Wright. And which is also like it heavily prominently features a murder trial at the center of it. And so I was super psyched when I found out like there's like Orson Welles as a Clarence Darrow stand-in. That's kind of a big difference with this film compared to a lot of the others, is that they very, like, everything is very close to the at least documented truth, and yet they changed all the names.
Interesting.
To show this court case. But it, like you said, it has a great similarity to In Cold Blood, because like Smith and Hickok, Loeb and Leopold, or as they're renamed in this story, Artie and what's Dean Stockwell's character name? I forget.
I just keep thinking he's the guy from Quantum Leap.
Yeah. And anyways, they are basically motiveless. But Loeb and Leopold in particular, kind of the one motive or kind of reasoning that comes out that also, to distinctly contrast it from In Cold Blood, keeps them from the death penalty, is this suggestion that their wealth is a large reason for their kind of their stunted morality, their stunted emotional depth and intelligence, even if they are incredibly educated. And so it's kind of like, you know, in a way it's this very similar but almost inverse, because Smith and Hickok in Cold Blood are very poor and
down and out.
Yeah. Whereas here it's like the kids that have it all, and so they basically treat their kidnapping and murder of this young child as a science experiment. And it's sick, it's disgusting. And like you kind of mentioned at the top, kind of the weird thing about this movie that really stood out to me, you know, I was definitely watching it thinking, like, you got Orson Welles playing essentially Clarence Darrow, and I haven't heard of this movie, and I love movies and I love Orson Welles. And I think it comes down to the fact that, and I think you texted me about this, or put it in our group online Slack chat. About how like the movie feels like a completely different thing when Orson Welles walks in like 2/3 of the way through.
He just like steal. The thing about this movie is that it's such a product of this like kind of the end of the studio system, right? As it's starting to wane. Because it has all of these elements that feel like a big 1940s, 1950s film, but the story is so dark, and they actually don't shy away from a lot of it. It is a very dark film. Just the vibe and the tone, the acting's really good across the board. I mean, Dean Stockwell, who plays Judd, I think you're looking for his name.
Yes, thank you.
And Bradford Dillman, just like unnerving. Dillman reminds me a lot of Anthony Perkins in Psycho. He has that same sort of schneid kind of floating along his words. Meanwhile, he's a psychopath underneath it all, right? The thing, I don't understand why they opened the movie the way that they did. Like that opening title card sequence. What are they thinking? Like, it's like, this is not, some like circus movie from 1940. It's so bizarre. It's just a bizarre opening. But then it settles into itself. It's messy. It's just a messy movie with really good acting. And in terms of the true crime elements, I thought it was interesting in the fact that like number one, they hinted it heavily that there's like a deeper romantic relationship between the two leads, but obviously they can't show it. But I think they actually did a good job of walking that line. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to not know that these two were, in love with each other. And so I think they actually did,
or that at least Judd was in love with Artie, and yes. Artie had like a sick kind of like
control over him.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a healthy relationship, but yeah, it's like it's a fascinating film. I think the best scene is when Judd attacks the girl, and it's like this reveal. And the way that she plays it too, what was her name? Diane Varsi, I think. And she like disappeared from acting after this movie. That was what I read.
She's good. She's good when she gets on the stand too.
Yeah, very good. And that whole scene is sort of like, oh man, here it is. Here's like this reveal of these, we talk about humanizing somebody. I think that scene actually did humanize him. Yeah. He's, has these impulses and these desires that he doesn't feel like he can control, and they come out and they hurt people, and they hurt people that he loves and that he likes. That felt very real and authentic to me. And I think when thinking about true crime, and I think that there's a fascination there with the act of hurting another person, because people are like, I could never do that. Who could do that? It turns out other people have just the same emotions that you do, and the way that they deal with them is very different than most people. And I think, that was that moment. And then it's like that happens. And then the whole thing, then they get caught. And there's like a pretty good interrogation scene with E.G. Marshall that I thought was solid. I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool kind of procedural thing. And then Orson Welles shows up. And then it's like I don't know how to put it into words. Like, I would say that both Dean Stockwell and Bradford Dillman acted really, really well in this movie. Orson Welles shows up and he's just on a different level.
Yeah.
He's just like, he's not acting. Like he's so inhabited the character that he was, that he like transcended the character that was written on the page into something completely different. He does the same thing in Third Man, I think.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm just like, wow. But when you look at it as a film, it's like, well, this makes no sense. It's like two different movies, right?
Right.
Or
really three, because I feel like the whole thing with like the peer that's also like moonlighting as a reporter.
Yeah, what's that
thing,
about?
like, that felt like very much like standard forgotten 50s flick kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then like I do think I agree with you that Dillman's at the top of his game, and I think Stockwell is too.
So good, bro. So good.
Like when he blows up finally during the interrogation at E.G. Marshall, who's also killing it. Guy I know him best as like the mean juror in 12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
And he's like the president in Superman 2 or whatever too. But like, yeah, it's so disjointed, unfortunately, and it just feels like it could have been a absolute like American classic had it been properly scripted and not.
It was also probably a decade too early.
Yep, that's fair too.
Like it's like part of the system. You're not going to have a lot. I don't think Richard Fleischer did this, right?
Yeah,
you don't think you got a lot of choice. They're basically,
right.
I always like to think of like those old, even a thing like Babylon or something, or like Hail Caesar, where there's just like studio execs like smoking cigars on set. Like, what are you doing? Like this is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's very much.
Where's Orson?
Another way in which it's kind of the inverse from In Cold Blood, right?
It's not an auteur
meticulously
thing.
detailing
There's
everything.
No French New Wave in 1959, so it's like there's nothing to point to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at Fleischer's filmography. This is the guy that did everything from Soylent Green to Amityville 3D, but also like the original 20,000 Leagues Under a Sea, and I don't know. He was definitely a hired hand.
Hey, man, everybody's got to make a paycheck.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's what I say. He's, what's interesting, like I'm going to go back to In Cold Blood really quick. Sure. Richard Brooks's career.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, that also doesn't make any sense. He fell off essentially after In Cold Blood.
It's crazy. Like, what did he did? How he did anything?
Right. I know.
I haven't seen The Happy Ending. I don't know what that is. A Dollar Sign, which is a movie with Goldie Hawn.
He did the adaptation of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which is pretty iconic, with Elizabeth Taylor and Paul Newman. Blackboard Jungle, which I've never seen, but that's supposed to be a pretty big 50s film after a famous
Cold
novel.
Blood, and you're like,
no, I know everything after that.
Old. How old would he would have been? Oh, okay.
No, yeah,
so he was like 50 in his late 50s when he made it. So okay, he's probably because he's kind of a little bit of journeyman for MGM, and then he went independent in the 60s, and then he eventually So In Cold Blood's kind of his masterpiece then. Yep. Better than anything I ever done. So that
I never will do.
Wait a second.
But okay, so as we're kind of wrapping this up, let's zoom out for a second before we do our final round of trivia is coming up in a few minutes. But I've been itching to ask because I don't think we've done this with previous cycles, but I was kind of looking at our previous collection of episodes on risque romance films and kind of just seeing like the vast gulf in quality between my favorites and like, why did Dan make me watch this? Bottom of the list stuff. What would you say, looking at all 12 films that were based on stranger than fiction true stories? What's your top? What's your bottom?
Oh my God, this is brutal. Top Straight Time, without a doubt.
I thought you were going to say that. Yeah,
nothing's even close. Like, it's not even the fact that it's like it felt like a movie that has not. I feel like I want to champion this movie for like the next decade of my life, and be like, no, Straight Time is a '70s classic film. You've missed it. Nobody's seen it. It's a little bit of an underdog, so I like that. I'd also say like. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't love this cycle of films.
Wow.
I think this is my least favorite cycle by far. Yeah. It just, nothing stood out to me. I didn't really love Dead Ringers that much.
Fuck you. That's my number one.
Fear and Loathing, didn't like it.
No, it don't work.
Heavenly Creatures, didn't love it either. Bronson Terminal, honestly, Bling Ring might be my number 2.
Wow.
The worst by far would be Serpent in the Rainbow.
What?
And The Terminal. The Terminal.
The Terminal is definitely my bottom. Yeah.
I mean, the thing about The Terminal is it's like very watchable. I love Wes Craven, but buddy, dude, Serpent in the Rainbow is unwatchable. It's nearly unwatchable. What about you? What are your choices? It's going to be Dead Ringers, right?
Yeah, Dead Ringers top, Terminal bottom. I actually really, for the most part, enjoy it. I think Terminal, second to last would be Fear and Loathing. And my number
Fear and Loathing has not aged well.
No.
And I love Hunter S. Thompson's work. I just, he completely missed the point of it.
It's a big nothing burger for me. My number 2 after Dead Ringers is probably Dog Day.
I enjoy Dog Day.
I love every frame of that mess of a movie. It's not a mess though. It's just like a mess, like morally.
Morally, it's all over the place.
Right.
But I think In Cold Blood's definitely high on my list too. It's like, wow. Really amazing film.
Yes.
Have we learned anything about like, I was thinking about this in the shower, I believe, this morning.
Shower Thoughts, classic.
Shower Thoughts. I feel like I'm looking back at our different series, like self-aware horror, existential thriller, serious action, risque romance, now stranger than fiction. I always feel I walk away from one of these cycles with like a different understanding of that genre or micro genre, I'm going to call it. Like absurdist action. Walking through those movies, I was like, oh, this all really did start with a movie like Branded to Kill. Like, it's like it really did start from this zany, surrealist B-movie world. Or like understanding this like self-aware horror and like how that started. We started with Last House on the Left, Wes Craven call out. And like all of that horror makes so much more sense going back that way. I don't know that I have a takeaway from Stranger Than Fiction, other than that it's really difficult to make a movie about a true subject and not be a complete asshole who's exploiting everybody involved.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think I don't think that this is a worse grouping of films artistically, but I do think it's a more depressing kind of trajectory of history.
It's sad. I feel like we've gone backwards.
Yeah, you start with like The other thing I couldn't stop thinking about during Compulsion is like school shooter. Like I kept thinking,
seriously, yeah.
Like that's how little we've
like
progressed as a society. That's how much we've regressed
yeah.
as a society.
Yeah, it's
and then we end with Cocaine Bear. It's like,
which is one of the worst movies I've seen this year, hands down.
Like, it's like,
so lazy, so freaking lazy.
It's just idiocracy, like in real time.
Oh God. Bling Ring, folks, go out and watch the Bling Ring for me. 2013.
I don't know.
Sophia Coppola. It's a hidden masterpiece. It's even hidden from the director herself.
Yeah. Okay. So let's end on a positive note. Some trivia is always fun.
Yes.
Let's see if you can do this. I think your best score has been 3 out of 5.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever.
These are very difficult, so I just want to put that out there.
I took your feedback, and I believe these ones are a little easier than the others, especially because it's hard to find like pre-1970 films that are based on like nutsy true stories.
Okay. Just ChatGPT this stuff. All right, let's go.
Okay. No, I did not use ChatGPT for any of these. I probably should have. That would have been a lot easier. Okay. 1961. Is this a real movie based on a strange true story or a fake one that I made up? With Tony Curtis in the lead role and the director of To Kill a Mockingbird at the helm, this wild true story of eccentric con man Ferdinand Waldo traces a life of lies, from faking a decorated army resume and impersonating a prison warden to falsifying an attempted suicide and posing as a cloistered monk.
I say true.
Yeah, good job. 1 out of 1. Robert Mulligan was nominated for a DGA for his work on The Great Imposter, which Spielberg said was a great influence on his 2002 comedy caper,
I remember
Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah. Okay, that's why. Yeah.
I added that to my watch list. It sounds fun. 1963. From the director of Bonnie and Clyde comes this strange B-movie thriller featuring a young Tom Skerritt in the lead role as Dr. William Chester Minor, the very real and very disturbed Civil War veteran that spent over 20 years in an insane asylum in the 1800s, filling his idle time murdering his fellow invalids, and as one of the chief contributors to a large-scale overseas project, the first official Oxford English Dictionary.
I'm going to say not true.
Yeah, you're 2 for 2, Dan. I did take that log line, though, from a work of creative nonfiction that's been on my reading list for a while. I think I will finally get to it after reading more about it. The Professor and the Madman, like a good 20% of the Oxford English Dictionary was written by an insane asylum patient.
Oh, perfect. He's got a lot of time on his hands.
Exactly. 1965, starring Vanessa Redgrave and Jason Robards. And from kitchen sink realism director Carl Rise comes this true story and biopic of one of the most cherished and controversial choreographers of all time, known for publicly lighting her parents' marriage certificate on fire, starting the Paris-based School for Life, which focused only on the arts of, quote, beauty and simplicity, and who ultimately made her way through countless torrid affairs until arriving as an expat in the Soviet Union, going full-on Bolshevik.
Was it true?
Yeah. Isadora follows the life of Isadora Duncan, pioneer of modern contemporary dance.
Look at that.
3 for 3. This is your chance, Dan. Can you finally redeem yourself?
I got this.
1966. Audrey Hepburn shines, both literally and figuratively, in the lead role as factory worker Grace Fryer in Vittorio De Sica's neo-realist rendering of the industrial age scandal of the century, wherein countless watch-dial painters unknowingly exposed themselves to the radioactive dangers of radium, leading to wide-scale abuse and cover-ups.
Is it true?
Fake. I made that one up.
No, I'm gonna
so
blow
close.
It. I know it. I know I'm gonna blow it.
Okay, so the hunt, the batting 1,000 or whatever the sports metaphor is not happening, but you can still go 4 for 5. Yeah. I did want to mention, though, that maybe you could argue that I cheated a little bit because I made that whole log line up until I realized in my research that there was a very little known movie in 2018 about that true story called Radium Girls.
I've heard of that, yeah.
It was released virtually during the pandemic and made no money. Okay. Last one, 1969. Under circumstances mysterious yet documented in several different fashions, Garfield's assassin, President Garfield, played by James Coburn, finds himself in a strange situation, being in charge of the subsequent electoral win for his replacement. Directed by Bonnie and Clyde auteur Arthur Penn.
Is it true?
False! Oh, no! I didn't even have that one fully written, and I just... wow, you blew it. It's okay.
Still got 3 out of 3. I'll take
3.
that.
Yeah, 3. That's not bad at all. Dan, it's been real. Thanks for indulging me in my episode trivia.
Love it. Love some trivia. Should we tease? This is the end of the cycle. Should we tease the next cycle?
Oh, yeah, let's do it. What do we got cooking?
So we're going to do movies that were set in the 1950s. I'm really excited about this because we really want to do Asteroid City, which is coming out in June. So next month, the new Wes Anderson movie set in the 1950s. And so we decided, hey, let's just do a whole theme on that and see how the viewpoint of the decade has changed over the years. So I'm really excited to do it. I have a good list of guests coming up. So please do join us for that. And thank you for listening. This has been Film Trace.